Hello, and welcome to another edition of Breaking the Guard. On today's episode, we're going to talk about how this weekend seemed to be a battle in the nursing home, right? Where we had two older guys fighting on the main event, right? First off, we'll go with uh, Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson. Now, this was streamed live on Netflix. I made a news item on it as well. I made predictions, and again, spoiler alerts, I was right. This was a decision win for Jake Paul. Pretty easy fight for him. And I will say, I don't think he tried to finish Tyson. I believe if he wanted to, he could have finished him anytime after the third round. There was a few moments where he would throw a good combination. I think particularly in the third round, he kind of rocked Tyson a little bit, or at least stumbled him because you could see Tyson's legs didn't look too great, and then he kind of backed off. And he had said as much in his post-fight interview how he didn't want to hurt Mike. Mike's a legend. He loves Mike, respects Mike, all this type of thing, right? So this wasn't a fight to entertain the fans. It was a fight to elevate his profile and make a lot of money, right? As long as you got in there knowing that, I think you were okay with this. It's a little weird, but hey, if Iron Mike is gonna pick up, at least a few million off doing this, if not maybe hopefully more than that, that's not a bad day of work. I would do that. Jacob bitter batter me for 8 rounds, 2 minute rounds. I won't complain about getting hit or losing a decision. Uh, but I see a lot of people online being really upset, saying, "Oh, this was rigged," or Tyson could have really knocked him out if he wanted to. I'm like, no, I don't think so. I mean, there's always a puncher's chance, but it isn't likely. Just like anybody can technically knock somebody out if the guy just stood there with his chin locked and lets you cold cock him, right? But it wasn't likely. And I think they also said Tyson's knee was he was wearing a knee brace, and he had said afterwards that his knee was bothering him, but it's no excuse, right? And he was happy with the result, and I'm sure he was because if I picked up a few $1 million for standing in the ring for like 16 minutes, that's again not a bad day, especially if you didn't really take any damage. Not a bad day at all. Uh, People endure far worse and get much less. You know, I just think a lot of people had unrealistic expectations that thinking this is going to be Mike Tyson of 37 years ago when he won the title before 10 years before Jake Paul was even born, right? Age is a real thing, right? You're not going to be an explosive power puncher in your late 50s and Mike Tyson's 59, especially when most of the tread has been taken off your tires, right? It isn't like Mike's had an easy life with no damage, so even though he's a little older, he's got a lot of mileage left in the tank, right? It's like, no, that's a vehicle that has put hundreds of thousands of miles, right? So it's got the wear of such a car. But again, he did it, right? Mike stood on his feet, never got knocked down. Again, I don't think Jake was trying to put him down. I think if he wanted to, he could have. That's my opinion on it. Tyson, I think, was probably putting more of an effort, uh, and probably not trying to get a KO finish either. If I think there may have been a gentleman's agreement, maybe not, but this looked more like a sparring match, not so much a fight. Like it looked like how if I'm grappling somebody and I just had this happened the other day. I went to grapple with somebody that I thought was a higher rank, but within the first minute I realized, oh, this guy is not as experienced as I thought, right? And then I just took it easy and went kind of light and carried him through the session, right? That's how this looked like, right? Maybe Jake initially, it looked like he gave Tyson a lot of respect. Tyson was throwing some heat in the first couple rounds, and the judges scored the first 2 rounds with Tyson, but then the remaining 6 rounds were all Jake, and it looked obvious that Tyson kind of got tired, and it appeared that his mobility was severely limited. Right, I do think there was probably something wrong with his legs. Couldn't really move too well. He had good head movement, at least in the pocket like he always does, but he couldn't really pursue uh, Jake very well. Now on the undercard, I watched part of the World Championship lightweight men's fight. Not that entertaining to me, to be honest. The women's fight was just barn burner. They were just smashing each other the whole time. Not, it didn't appear that technical. They just seemed to go head to head and just trade. So highly entertaining. Although it just seemed the woman Amanda was big into clashing with heads, and she did cut open a really big cut right on the brow of the right eye of Serrano. But Serrano, at least to me, appeared to have gotten the better of the contest despite that big headbutt that opened the cut, which again is a illegal blow. And most of the commentators and I guess the commentators judge agreed, but of course in boxing, it wouldn't be boxing if there wasn't terrible decisions. And this doesn't seem to be an exception to the rule. Unfortunately, they gave it to the current champion. So like this is 2 times that the Serrano lady lost highly contested decisions, right? What can you do? But it was an entertaining fight. So if you wanted to see like people stand and trade, it was that woman's fight that you came for. The Tyson fight was more just Tyson and Jake Paul can collect a big paycheck, right? Uh, so there was that, and hopefully Mike doesn't need to do any more things like this, right? I'm glad he was able to walk away with this unscathed. Uh, doesn't really affect his legacy, in my opinion, right? I think everyone knows, or everyone should know exactly what this was, which was it was a payday. This wasn't a real fight, right? From either side, in my opinion. If it was a real fight, I think Jake Paul would be able to put Tyson out of there. And I know a lot of people hate to hear that, but it's called reality, right? Moving in now, that was on Friday. Then on Saturday, the main event for the UFC was Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. And this is another one where people were calling all their reviews. But, I mean, come on. Stipe is 42. So, yeah, he's older. But he's not that old. I mean, I think Jon Jones is 37. So it's a 5-year age gap. What's more significant, from my understanding, I don't think Stipe has fought in at least 3 years. So obviously, he is of retirement age, and he was. That would have made him like 39 before from his last fight, and then hasn't fought in 3 years. So it doesn't seem to me like this is a guy who is like actively pursuing the career, right? Like they just said, "Hey, you want to make some more money?" And just like Tyson, he's like, "Yeah, sign me up." So this does seem like another money fight opportunity, although I don't think this was a rigged fight or like a gentleman's agreement fight, much like what I think the Mike Tyson and Jake Paul situation was. I think this was more of a gimme fight for Jon Jones and a payday for Miocic, right? And the result is not unexpected. Jon Jones was able to take down Miocic very quickly, punish him with elbows. But he didn't go away, quickly. He was able to survive the first round, did a little better in the second round, and then the third round, Jon Jones was able to put him away with a spinning back kick that got him on the left kidney, it looks like. Yeah, you don't normally see people drop from the left side body shot, but it's possible. And I'm sure if Jon Jones landed a shot on my left kidney like that, probably would probably hurt a lot, right? We normally see those type of shutdowns on the right side though, because that's usually a liver shot that puts you away. But kidney shots also suck. And I'm only guessing. Maybe it was just it just hurt the abs, but I would guess it was probably because the heel really dug in there. So if it got to the kidney somehow, it would definitely put you down as well, and that led to a TKO finish. Jon Jones just swarmed him after he dropped. So this doesn't answer any questions that we already didn't know, which was, of course, Jon Jones was going to beat Stipe. In all honesty, Stipe was probably done when he was 39. His best years had already passed him at that point, but he definitely had a great legacy in the UFC. This was more of just collecting another paycheck, and being a headliner, he's obviously going to get some percentage points. So it obviously made a lot of sense financially to do that. And he's probably walking away with less money than Tyson would have got of, and significantly more abuse, right? And more damage to the legacy as well, honestly. Although it doesn't really change my opinion of him much. Some people, it would be, he got destroyed by Jon Jones. He wasn't really that good as a heavyweight. It's like, the guy's 42 now, right? And again, even though the age difference isn't much, I think the stages of the career are very different. Although Jon Jones, to be fair, doesn't look like the Jon Jones of at least what I remember when he was coming up the ranks, and he was just phenomenal, tip-top shape and just destroying everybody. He doesn't look as great as he used to, in my opinion. I think being a heavyweight, while maybe for him dieting-wise is easier, he doesn't look as smooth. Uh, Again, he has gotten older. He's 37. I think for most fighters, that's usually this. You're at the point where you're skidding downwards, right? Physically, at least. You're not getting. Your recovery is not going to be the same, especially if you're not doing testosterone and TRT and all this other stuff, which he has shown he does do on occasion when he pops. So you're going to have issues being able to train as hard as you used to. And now it's basically going to be relying on very smart preparation and just having your technique and experience really carry you through those fights. And this does now question whether he would be able to face a younger fighter like Aspinall, who is a rising commodity. And I guess we'll find out in the coming days where he thinks he is going to go. He seems to have hinted before the fight a lot about fighting Pereira. And this doesn't necessarily change that factor, because he was able to take Stipe down quite easily. And honestly, he could probably do the same to Pereira. Right? So I think that fight is still an interesting fight, right? I think it always was, still is. But doesn't change the fact in my mind that there's an interim champion. If you're the current champion, you're a disputed champion. I forgot to pay attention to that when they announced him. If they just called him the world champion, or they call him the undisputed, which would be a mistake, because he would be a disputed champion since there is an interim there, right? So there's an asterisk into the name right now as current heavyweight champion, right? I feel like he should be fighting Aspinall. Aspinall has beaten the number 3, the number 4, the number 5, and the number 6 people in his division. I think he hasn't fought Cyril Gane yet, which, I would say would be a good fight to see, except that he's the interim champ. So the only fight for him is Jon Jones. And I don't want to keep hamping on this because I've talked about this before, so I'll move on, right? But I think that fight should happen. Otherwise, just retire and be done. Right? If you don't feel like you want to defend the belt against these challenges and you're just going after money fights, I mean, I don't fault you. I would like to fight money fights also if I was given the choice, but this is not your show, right? Like you're supposed to be fighting under a structure where you fight challengers based on their rankings and you defend belts once you return from an injury or whatnot, and you defend it against an interim belt. But if you're not going to follow the rules, it seems like, well, then you're not allowed to participate. If you're running a league, ethically, in my opinion. Anyhow, other fights that happened here. Well, one I have to say, another one for the old salty dogs, Jim Miller, right? He's another one who I think he's 41, right? So he's a close-ish. He's over 40. He's got a lot of mileage, right? But he still pulled out a W with a guillotine finish in round one, looking great the whole time. And actually, he looked better this time around than he did last time, And I think he lost his last fight by a decision. But in this fight, he actually looked pretty good. He looked like he had the upper hand the entire time in the striking and was starting to hurt his opponent. That guy tried to shoot in and then jumped into a Jim Miller guillotine, and it was all over pretty fast. Got a quick tap out of it appeared to be an arm-side guillotine, if I'm not mistaken. And when Joe Rogan interviewed him, asking him when he's going to stop, he's like, I'll stop when I feel like stopping, And so, hey, I think he's obviously going for records. Besides, of course, getting paid. I mean, he's got to have the longest active streak in UFC history, I would imagine, or close to it. He's got a good amount of wins. Out of his past 4 fights, he's won 3, so he's still relevant. Now, he hasn't fought... Bobby Miller obviously was a tough fight, that was his last loss. And he did all right there. He hung in there. So, I mean, can you break into the ranked? That might be like a secondary goal for him. I think he just wants to fight to try to amp up his numbers to some unbreakable record. But he's good enough where if it's set up right, he could get back into the top 15, which would be an impressive thing to do at 41. But yeah, he's doing something right. He looks in great shape. I mean, obviously not as in good shape as he used to be when he was younger, but considering the age, looks pretty solid. And doing a great job moving in there. He looked good moving in there and was able to secure another finish. So good on Jim Miller for representing. But then, of course, the co-main event, you have Michael Chandler with Oliveira. And no surprises there, in my opinion, at least, that Oliveira came out and got the W here. Although Chandler made it interesting and Oliveira always obliging. They did have some crazy antics in there. I think in the 5th round, Chandler, I think there was about a minute left. Oliveira had the back body triangle. I was just holding on to him. And Chandler would just stand up from being flat, with Charles on his back there, sit up, stand up, make a little hand gesture, and then just backsplash. And then do that a second time before the clock ran out. I mean, on one hand, it's like, that takes a lot of energy and a good amount of strength to be able to pull off. And at least Michael Chandler's conditioning is solid. Like, he's able to do this repeatedly and doesn't seem, fazed by it. On the other hand, did seem to get dominated, technically. And I think it's one of those guys that just works too much conditioning, too much fight camp stuff, not enough skill development, right? He hasn't had a fight in years, but doesn't seem to have increased skill level. Like, he seems like the same guy that just, he's going out there and making a show. And again, everybody likes his fights because he takes lots of wild risks and chances, but I don't know. I mean, if I'm fighting, I want to win ultimately. I don't just want to make a show of it. Sure, you're going to get put on the stage repeatedly, but my ultimate goal when I'm fighting is to prove that I'm the best. And I can only do that if I'm fighting technically with good strategy. If I'm just going for haymakers and, doing extravagant, slams that don't result in any change of position, seems I'm being very inefficient with my motions. So it's a shame. I've trained with Michael Chandler back in the day, coached him a little bit when I was at Alliance. And really nice guy. Again, obviously solid dude, good conditioning. But technically, I feel like there's a lot that could be worked on. And the fact that it doesn't seem to have improved by much is distressing to me. But he's another guy that's kind of getting towards that tail end of the career there. And it seems like he's been waiting around for that not that Michael Chandler, uh, Conor McGregor, right? And if Conor McGregor, watched that fight, which he obviously did, probably he's still happy with that matchup because it's probably one that he would likely win. And the style would make it an entertaining fight regardless because Chandler is going to go for broke. So I mean, I guess that probably might still be on the table. Although I can't remember the last time Chandler won a fight. Like he just seems to lose fights in impressive fashion. You know, uh, so it's bizarre. I can't really relate to wanting to go through that, right? Like if I'm not getting better in each fight, I'm not sure what I'm doing. But that's me. But yeah, that's what we've been seeing here. In the fight world, I feel sometimes people are so focused on conditioning and just training in a fight camp that they forget that they have to develop skill, right? We're not just an athlete that has a very limited skill set, so it's just more about conditioning. There are certain sports where I feel like since it's not that complicated, there's not that many motions, you can just kind of forget about building as much technique. I think, again, I'm ignorant, so forgive me if I insult somebody in their sport, but we look at something like maybe sprinting, right? And like a short interval. Of course, there's a lot of techniques behind how to get off the gate and how to develop maximum speed using your toes and the ball of your feet to pull through the ground, and how to chamber your arms so you can get the maximum amount of drive. There's technique there, but I I'm ignorant of Olympic level sprinting technique, but I'm pretty sure at a certain point there's not much more technique you can pour in there, and it's more about how well you're preparing, how much optimization you've done in your diet and streamlining yourself, and even the gear you're wearing, the type of shoes you have, the type of clothes you have to kind of streamline, even maybe your hairdo or whatnot, to really streamline your aerodynamics as much as possible. And of course, just training hard enough so to develop more effective muscle mass so you can sprint and explode faster, right? And obviously, dietary energy to have enough ATP so you can do that 400-meter sprint at 100% capacity. I don't think there's as much seminars and learning sessions where you're learning new things or you're building new techniques or doing new drills you've never done before. I don't think that's a big part of a world-class sprinter's training regimen. Whereas in MMA, that is constant for just about everybody. There's always new things to learn. Jon Jones was training with Gordon Ryan for this camp, who apparently was also in the corner for Jon Jones, right? Uh, and Jon Jones, as I've said before, is probably the greatest fighter of all time, uh, with an asterisk, but with the cheating and the eye gouging and all the other dirty stuff he does. But even if you took all that dirty stuff away, the guy is still a technical monster. He's got incredible heart and drive and incredible belief in himself. So he is on that top 3 list, but he is still working on new skills. And he's probably maybe 20 years in the game as a competitor in the UFC. So it's there, and I could tell you there's still things in MMA that he probably doesn't know yet, right? And if he's not at a point where he's still learning new skills, right, then it's a mistake in my opinion, right? That's when someone can beat you, because they'll find out these weak areas and exploit them. Because MMA is such a complicated sport, there's so much ground to cover that you're always going to be learning new skills, right? If you're a dedicated student, right? Or you're starting to specialize and improve certain skills you already know but are not expert at, right? And you're going to try to at least level yourself up, right? I've talked about this in a previous podcast where there's we rated our skill levels in percentage from 0 to 100%. Even the most expert of experts on a particular subject is not 100%, right? I said I would consider myself somewhere in the top 90% for Kimuras, right? And maybe an argument could be made I'm not even in the 90, maybe I'm in the 80s, right? So that's how harsh and critical I am of skill, right? So even someone like Jon Jones, he's not, going to be plus 90% on all the skills of fighting, right? So there's always room to improve and become better. So I feel like people who stop learning very early in their career, once they start tasting success, are really shooting themselves in the foot. It doesn't mean they can't continue to succeed, but I feel like the shelf life is going to be considerably shorter for their long-term success. Because, as a more veteran fighter, you do have experience on your side, and you might have incredible physique and conditioning, and that might be able to carry you through a lot of fights with your previous skill set that still works. But the next generation that comes through that is learning a lot more than you did at that era is going to overpass you quite easily, I believe. So if you're not willing to adapt that student mindset and continue to learn and humble yourself, you're going to find yourself taking lots of L's.